Fluorescent light washed over the operations room as controllers leaned toward their scopes, tracing glowing traces that marked each aircraft. One return in the high-altitude stream held their attention. A modern twin-engine airliner on a scheduled route, stable at cruise. Weather reports indicated clear skies along the track. Winds aloft remained moderate, and no convective cells intruded near its path. The latest altitude readout matched the flight plan exactly. On the frequency, routine phraseology filled the speakers, unhurried and precise, as the crew read back a minor course adjustment. The final exchange sounded utterly ordinary. A controller issued a new heading, the pilot acknowledged, voice level and unstrained. Then silence followed as the aircraft continued on course. On radar, the target held steady. Then, within seconds, it failed to refresh. One sweep passed, then another, leaving only a clean void on the screen where the coded blip had previously pulsed. No transponder ident reappeared, no primary echo emerged at a lower altitude, and no emergency squawk flashed across the consoles. Headsets stayed pressed to ears as calls went unanswered. Assuming a sudden catastrophic failure, controllers initiated the standard emergency response. Flight progress strips were pulled, position estimates were plotted, and search and rescue coordination centers received coordinates along the presumed track. Aircraft were diverted to scan a widening corridor. Vessels at sea altered course toward the last known position. Logs recorded sorties flown, sectors swept, and altitudes methodically checked. Yet reports kept returning negative. No oil slicks, no floating debris, no life rafts, and no bodies appeared, despite coverage that extended over hundreds of square miles. The airliner remained unlocated, officially missing, with no confirmed crash site to explain its disappearance. The Boeing 707 stood on the Narita apron beneath cold, clear winter skies, its white Varig livery reflecting the floodlights as loaders in fluorescent vests moved methodically around it. Forklifts brought containerized freight to the open cargo doors, where ground crews secured pallets with nets and metal locks. Among the cargo, handlers noted several specially marked crates holding 153 canvases by Manabu Meb, documented on manifests and insurance forms as high-value fine art bound for Brazil. Inside the cockpit, the 6 Brazilian crew members ran through checklists with practiced rhythm. Captain Gilberto Araújo da Silva verified instruments and navigation data, his logbook already marked by thousands of hours, and the memory of surviving the Varig Flight 820 accident near Paris. The first officer and flight engineer cross-checked fuel figures with ground technicians, while 2 other pilots and a flight engineer on duty rotation reviewed long-haul procedures for the trans-Pacific leg to Los Angeles. As refueling trucks disconnected and ground power was removed, Narita's control tower cleared the cargo jet for departure according to the evening schedule. The Varig 707's engines spooled up, their roar washing over the tarmac as the aircraft taxied past rows of airliners from Asia, North America, and Europe. In the late 1970s, such flights carried Brazil's flag carrier across increasingly busy Pacific routes, transporting manufactured goods, mail, and rare cargoes like Mab's paintings between Japan, the United States, and South America. The jet climbed steadily out of Narita, its navigation systems locked onto the long trans-Pacific track toward Anchorage. Inside the cockpit, instruments indicated a routine climb to the cleared cruising altitude, while cabin crew moved through the aisles, preparing for the overnight sector. Fuel burn matched the flight plan, the airspeed held steady, and the aircraft settled onto its assigned airway. Outside, the winter night over Honshu and the adjacent ocean remained clear, with only scattered cloud layers far below. As the aircraft passed beyond Japan's coastal radar, surveillance screens in the control room gradually lost the transponder return, just as procedures of the time anticipated. Controllers now depended on scheduled position reports to track the flight's progress across vast, unmonitored ocean. Around 30 minutes after departure, the crew checked in on frequency, reporting level at cruising altitude and giving an estimated time over the next navigation waypoint. Their voices sounded unhurried, the redbacks precise, with no hint of technical problems or discomfort. Beyond that last transmission, the flight continued into a region where radar no longer painted its course, and only expected timings and altitudes defined its presence. Meteorological charts for that night showed moderate upper-level winds but no significant storms intersecting the route. No towering cumulonimbus cells and no widespread turbulence reports from other aircraft. When the next compulsory position report time passed with silence, controllers noted the omission, assuming frequencies were congested or a minor radio fault had interrupted the call rather than an unfolding disaster. By the time the final scheduled position report passed without contact, controllers in Tokyo approached the consoles with a new stiffness in their movements. Headsets crackled as fresh attempts went out on high-frequency and very high-frequency channels, cycling through primary and backup frequencies in rapid sequence. A controller scribbled times in the margin of a flight progress strip, each unanswered call underlined once, then twice. Nearby radar scopes showed no reassuring return, only the blank sweep of the antenna over the North Pacific. In the coordination room, telephones rang in short clipped bursts as supervisors informed neighboring centers that the aircraft had gone silent beyond its last known checkpoint. Airliners already crossing the Pacific joined the effort, their crews asked to relay calls in case a failed radio or antenna left the missing jet half-deaf to ground stations. Voices from cockpits over Alaska, the Aleutians, and the open ocean repeated the same call sign into the static, listening for even a fragment of acknowledgement. Nothing came back. In a small office corner, a watch officer pulled a thick binder of procedures closer and read out the thresholds for declaring uncertainty, then alert, then distress. Each threshold had already been crossed. Messages flowed to US authorities, and with them the coordinates of the last known fix and estimated fuel remaining, quietly transforming concern into a formal emergency. Within hours, aircraft and ships from the US Coast Guard, US Air Force, and Japanese maritime services fanned out along the Great Circle track, steering first toward the calculated point where the jet should have appeared next. Crews stared down from low altitudes at long, wind-ruffled waves, searching for the faint geometry of metal or the unnatural sheen of fuel on water. Navigation officers marked grids on plotting charts as briefings emphasized the limitations of daylight, range, and weather. Satellite coverage offered only broad, imprecise swathes of cloud and sea. Day after day, radio logs recorded negative sightings. Sonar buoys heard only the murmur of the ocean. Official communiques moved from guarded optimism to a formal presumption of loss, yet some investigators underlined in their notes that nothing, no debris, no beacon, no oil trail, had confirmed a crash at all. In Rio de Janeiro, the official inquiry opened with stacks of logbooks, telexes, and maintenance sheets laid out under fluorescent lights. Inspectors read through Varig's files on PPVLU line by line, confirming recent routine checks and the absence of deferred major defects. Technical advisors from Japan and the United States joined briefings, pointing to the Boeing 707's global safety record in the late 1970s and its well-understood systems. Charts, wiring diagrams, and structural schematics covered the tables, but none singled out an obvious mechanical culprit. Investigators revisited Varig's accident history, including the serious 1973 crash involving the same captain, and compared it with fleet-wide performance. They circled potential parallels on incident summaries, then crossed them out when no clear pattern appeared. Cabin fire scenarios were modelled using material burn rates and ventilation flows, suggesting thick smoke would likely have triggered a distress call. Rapid decompression and structural failure cases were tested against the expectation of scattered wreckage, floating seat cushions, insulation, or cargo drifting into shipping lanes or onto remote beaches. Navigation specialists plotted the planned route and a lattice of possible track deviations across the South Pacific on large wall maps. Using prevailing winds, fuel endurance data, and Boeing 707 performance charts, they drew arcs marking where PPVLU would probably have descended if left uncontrolled at various altitudes. Oceanographers contributed current models tracing how debris would have spread over days and weeks. Internal summaries noted a growing impasse. Every trajectory that ended in the sea implied a debris field that, despite focused searches, never appeared. In insurance offices in Sao Paulo and Tokyo, adjusters sifted through policy schedules that listed each of the 153 Manabu Mabe canvases line by line. Dimensions, titles, exhibition histories, and yen to cruzeiro conversions turned vivid abstractions into cold figures. Lawyers compared bills of lading and cargo manifests, confirming that the cases had been properly declared and loaded. Underwriters recalculated exposure, realizing that this one consignment concentrated an extraordinary share of artistic and financial value in a single hold. In courtrooms, legal teams argued over jurisdiction and liability, projecting flight paths onto diagrams while pointing to clauses about force majeure and unexplained loss. Varig's representatives insisted that every known protocol had been followed, while counsel for the insurers probed for procedural gaps that might limit payouts. Parallel civil actions demanded compensation for the lost works, citing catalogues, raisonnés, and museum records. Expert witnesses described how Mabe's rising stature had driven premiums higher, making the disappearance a uniquely expensive catastrophe. In galleries and studios, curators and artists scrutinized surviving photographs and exhibition catalogues, trying to imagine the missing canvases now locked away in darkness or destroyed beyond recovery. Some critics suggested that the loss altered the trajectory of Brazilian abstract art, erasing a concentrated phase of experimentation that scholars would never fully reconstruct. As theories of hijacking, theft, and covert resale circulated, the absence of debris or wreckage fed a persistent suspicion that the paintings, and perhaps the aircraft itself, had been made to vanish by design. Discussion in Brazilian newspapers and aviation circles often returned to the idea of a meticulously planned hijacking. Commentators imagined armed men waiting among the passengers, seizing the cockpit after takeoff and ordering a diversion toward a clandestine airstrip. They pictured the cargo hold opened under guard, the paintings unloaded in haste, and the jet hidden or destroyed before dawn. Yet flight plans, radar plots, and the rigid fuel limits of a Boeing 707 all resisted that storyline. To sustain the hijacking scenario, some reports proposed distant destinations in Asia or the Soviet Far East, regions perceived as opaque and heavily militarized. Analysts measured runway lengths on little-known airfields, compared them with the takeoff and landing requirements of a loaded 707, and searched for any trace of an unscheduled arrival. No record surfaced of customs agents surprised by a foreign jet. No air traffic controller's log noted an anonymous four-engine aircraft descending without a call sign. Others looked north, drawing parallels with Cold War incidents in which aircraft were diverted or intercepted near hostile airspace. They imagined the jet shepherded toward North Korea, its transponder silenced, its fate sealed far from familiar routes. Investigators reviewed intelligence summaries, diplomatic cables, and press leaks for even a hint of such an operation. The files that became public showed nothing. No intercepted orders, no defectors' testimony, no satellite images of a captured Brazilian 707 hidden on a remote apron. As the years passed without wreckage, more elaborate explanations circulated through late-night radio shows and small columns in Brazilian newspapers. Anonymous sources claimed a radio silence order from military channels, hinting that the airliner had wandered into a forbidden corridor and been intercepted. Commentators pointed to the precedent of Korean Airlines Flight 007, shot down by Soviet forces in 1983, and suggested a similar fate might have unfolded invisibly somewhere over the Pacific in 1979. Other stories focused on what the aircraft carried. The documented manifest listed paintings headed for an exhibition and routine commercial freight, supported by customs stamps and insurance paperwork. Yet whispers insisted the art crates hid electronics, weapons components, or politically sensitive documents. Investigators rechecked export filings and shipping company ledgers, confirming values, insurance policies, and prior handling of the same artworks, and found no discrepancy large enough to support the idea of a concealed high-risk cargo that might trigger a covert operation. Beyond those claims, more speculative ideas took hold in magazines devoted to mysteries and unexplained phenomena. Articles described invisible magnetic vortices stretching across the Pacific, alleged time dilations that displaced aircraft, and abductions linked to contemporary UFO reports. Writers drew comparisons to stories about the Bermuda Triangle, despite the flight's route lying far outside that region. When matched against navigation beacons, fuel endurance, and known weather patterns, these scenarios left no measurable trace, yet they continued to thrive wherever official uncertainty left room for imagination. Investigators laid the flight path of Varig 967 alongside earlier disappearances and saw familiar patterns. In 1948, British South American Airways Star Tiger had crossed the Atlantic under overcast skies, its last radio contact routine and untroubled, before silence fell and no wreckage surfaced. In 1962, Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 had climbed into the western Pacific night, sending no distress call, leaving military radar with only a fading trace and search aircraft with nothing but empty ocean. Technicians compared the tools available in those eras with those that had watched Varig 967. Over open water, radar coverage still ended abruptly at coastal horizons, leaving large stretches of sky unobserved. In the 1970s, inertial navigation and radio beacons guided crews, but no satellite-based ADS-B signal fed a continuous track to controllers. Position reports depended on crew transmissions, and once radio contact ceased, the aircraft's path dissolved into estimates and plotted assumptions. Oceanographers unfolded bathymetric charts to explain how metal and fabric vanished into trenches and abyssal plains. They traced currents that pushed floating fragments across gyres, broke them down under waves, and carried lighter pieces toward remote shorelines years later, as seen with scattered debris from Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. Between crushing depths, shifting sediments, and vast unsearched seafloor, they showed how an airliner, its cargo and its stories, could descend beyond practical human reach. In living rooms and modest kitchens across Brazil, relatives of the 6 crew members still unfolded yellowing clippings and official letters, trying to read meaning into bureaucratic phrases. Decades after 1979, their voices carried the same hesitation. No wreckage, no funeral, no last object to hold. Birthdays and holidays passed with one empty chair, preserved uniforms and framed photographs. Some spoke of dreams in which the missing walked through the door, unaged, asking why everyone had given up searching. In art catalogues and museum files, curators typed the same stark notation beside entire series of canvases by Manabu Mabe, Desaparecido, Missing at Sea. Reproductions from earlier exhibitions became the only remaining windows into those works, their colours flattened to ink on paper. Scholars traced their provenance up to the cargo manifest of Varig Flight 967, then stopped. Insurance ledgers, shipping documents, and gallery correspondence all converged on the same void over the North Pacific, where both art and aircraft ceased to leave a trace. In official archives, the Brazilian Aviation Authority filed the loss as an accident with unknown causes, maintaining it as an open case on paper long after active investigation had stalled. Varig itself moved from national emblem to struggling carrier and eventual collapse in the 2000s, while this disappearance endured as a defining enigma in its history. A Boeing 707, reported in stable cruise over a clear winter ocean, simply failed to arrive, leaving only maps, unanswered calls, and a straight trackline fading into darkness.